So now we're going to work with multiplying fractions. When we multiply fractions, we don't need a common denominator. But before you multiply your fractions, you want to simplify what can simplify. And again, simplifying fractions and simplifying multiplication works the same way. If you have a factor in the numerator that can be taken out of a factor in the denominator, you want to simplify that before multiplying. So in this example here, I know that 5 can divide into 5 once, and 5 can divide into 15 3 times. So I'm going to simplify that piece, and be careful, you always want to put your marker of the number it's simplified to. And I see 4 can go into 8 once, or 4 can go into 4 once, and 4 goes into 8 once. And now that everything's simplified, you multiply across. And again, numerator to numerator, so it's 1 times 1 is 1. Denominator to denominator, so we end up with 2 times 3 is 6. So multiplying these two fractions together, I end up with 1 over 6. Pause and try. Okay, in this case, you see 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 30 10 times, 8 goes into 8 once, 8 goes into 32 4 times. And again, you want to multiply across. 1 times 1 is 1, 4 times 10 is 40. So my solution here is 1 over 40. Pause and try. Again, be careful of signs here. We have a positive times a negative. We're going to simplify first. 5 goes into 5 once, 5 goes into 15 3 times, 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 12 4 times. And again, I have that negative, so be careful. Your solution is going to end up being a negative 4 over 3. Now, whenever you're dealing with a fraction and a whole number, same with addition, we want to make sure that we put that whole number over 1. So that's the first thing we're going to do, is put the whole number over 1 and then perform the operation. So in this case, I'm going to simplify first. I simplify the 16 and the 32, and I multiply across. So I'm left with 5 over 2. So it's really important that whole number you put over 1 and then simplify and multiply across. Pause and try. Again, I put the whole number over 1. I'm going to simplify here. And when I simplify and multiply across, I end up with 16 over 1. And again, that's where that property of 1 comes into play. You have to simplify your answer, so your answer will end up simply being 16. You cannot leave your answer over 1. Pause and try. You also want to be careful of signs here. We have a negative 8 over 1. When I simplify, I'm going to end up with a negative 1, and my solution will be a negative 3 over 2. So signs are really important. Now, whenever we're doing division, it's important to know what reciprocals are. Reciprocals are two numbers that multiply together that their product will equal 1. So in this case, when I multiply 3/4 to 4 over 3, I see that when I simplify, I will end up with 1 over 1, and 1 over 1 simply equals 1. Therefore, 3 over 4 times 4 over 3, the reciprocals of each other, because when I multiply them together, it equals 1. So a key hint here is, when you want to find the reciprocal of a fraction, just flip the fraction over. So understanding that will help us with division. So when we want to divide fractions, what you're going to need to do is you're going to keep the first fraction, you're going to change the division symbol to multiplication, and you're going to get the reciprocal of the second fraction. So it looks like this. I'm going to keep the first fraction, I change the division to multiplication, and I flip the second fraction. So in order to do division, you have to remember this process. Now it's multiplication, and you multiply. You simplify first, and then you multiply across. So now when I simplify the 18 and the 15, I'm dividing 3 out of both of them because that's the common factor. So I'm left with 6 and a 5. And then 7 will go into 14 2 times, and 7 goes into 7 once. So now that it's simplified, I'll multiply across, top to top. 6 times 2 is 12, bottom to bottom, 1 times 5. Pause and try. So here again, you're going to keep the first fraction, change it to multiplication, and get the reciprocal for the second fraction. And notice that the second fraction has a negative. You want to make sure you keep the negative with the fraction. Now when you simplify here, we're going to simplify the 7 goes into 7 once, and 7 goes into 14 2 times. When you multiply, don't lose that negative sign. We have 5 times 1, we get 5. 2 times 3, we get 6, and because it's a positive times a negative, my answer ends up being a negative 5 over 6. Pause and try. Again, you're going to keep the first fraction, change it to multiplication, and flip the second fraction. We're going to simplify here, and then we're going to multiply across. So your solution should be 9 over 8. And just like multiplication of fractions and whole numbers, division of fractions and whole numbers, you want to also put that whole number over 1. So in this case, that 8 would turn into 8 over 1. And it's important here because remember, the second fraction has to flip. So that no longer will be 8. That's going to end up being 8 over 1. So you're going to keep the first fraction, you're going to change it to multiplication, and then you're going to flip the second fraction. And then you're going to simplify. So in this case, we end up simplifying, and we multiply across, and we're left with 2 over 25. So it's really important when you're dealing with whole numbers and fractions is to put the whole number over 1, especially with division, because you see, when you flip it, it turns into a fraction. Pause and try. Again, I'm putting that whole number over 1. I'm keeping the first fraction, change it into multiplication, flipping the second, and I'm simplifying and multiplying across. Your solution here should be 2 over 7. Pause and try. Again, make sure you don't lose that negative sign. I put the whole number over 1. I flip the second fraction, change it to multiplication, and I'm going to simplify here. And in this case, 4 is coming out of 8 and 12, and that's where the 2 and the 3 come from. I multiply across, and I want to make sure I don't lose that negative sign. So I end up with a negative 10 over 3. Now when we're dealing with multiplication and there's variables in the fractions, it works the same way. You can simplify if you have the same variable on top and the same variable on the bottom. So the first thing you want to do is make sure you're reducing. So I'm simplifying the 7 and the 21, and I see that they have the x on the top and an x on the bottom. And because one's on the top and one's on the bottom, I can simplify them or cancel them out. And then I can multiply across. So 1 times 4 is 4, 15 times 3 is 45, and that is my solution for this multiplication problem. Pause and try. Again, we're simplifying here, and when we simplify, we multiply across, we see the variable gets canceled, and we're left with 20 over 63. Pause and try. Okay, so now this is division, so you want to make sure you change it to multiplication, flip the second fraction, then you're going to simplify here, and now when I simplify, I want you to notice here that there's nothing to simplify that y with on the top. Therefore, my solution should have a y in it. So we end up with 4 over 9y. So now we're going to work with complex fractions. Complex fractions are really division problems. It's a fraction with another fraction in the numerator or in the denominator, or both. So this is a complex fraction here. I have a fraction on top and a fraction on the bottom. And remember, that line represents division. So in order to actually simplify this, I could rewrite this as a division problem with fractions. It's the first fraction, the top fraction, being divided by the bottom fraction. Once it's set up as a division problem, Then you know how to solve it. You keep the first fraction, you change it to multiplication, and get the reciprocal for the second fraction. And then you simplify and multiply across. So complex fractions are really just fractions being divided. Pause and try. So again, set it up like division. The top fraction's being divided by the bottom. And now once it's set up, you know you keep the first fraction, change it to multiplication, and flip the second fraction. Simplify and multiply across. So you should end up with 8/15.